Welcome to the Milk Bottle eCommerce Show, brought to you by Milk Bottle Labs, Ireland's top-rated and officially accredited Shopify and Klaviyo e-commerce experts. Founder Keith Matthews interviews e-commerce professionals, app developers and entrepreneurs to share as much digital knowledge and e-commerce tips and tricks as possible. This podcast is kindly supported by our go-to e-commerce tools, Rewind.io, the leading backup solution for Shopify, BigCommerce, Trello and more. Let's just say it's the cheapest insurance policy you'll ever get for your Shopify store and all your valuable data. Simply go to rewind.io/milkbottle to get your first month for free. Our go-to Shopify application to supercharge in-store pickup and local delivery on your Shopify store is Zapiet. It's fully customizable and scalable from one location to thousands. Backed by outstanding customer support, it's no wonder Zapiet is trusted by over 10,000 plus stores across 150 countries. Now over to your host, Keith Matthews.
Hey folks, welcome back. Today I am delighted to be chatting to Melbourne-based Gavin Ballard of GetSubmarine.com. Gavin has pivoted his original Shopify Plus agency, Disco Labs, into a product-based SaaS which helps Shopify Plus merchants build tailored experiences on Shopify. Gavin has a long-established reputation within the Shopify developer community, and I've known Gavin since 2015, so this chat is an absolute delight. In fact, I doubt Gavin even remembers meeting me in London in 2015, but we'll know in a moment. We discuss Gavin's history, we discuss the broader e-commerce landscape, and we also discuss headless commerce, flexible commerce, and a new flexible term, which is known as composable commerce. Gavin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Keith. I remember it vividly. How can you forget your first meeting with Keith? You can't.
Absolutely. We were, myself and Peter Corkery, the other half of Milk Bottle, were in London that day. I do remember that I think I made everybody late. And we eventually arrived at the venue, and Kerr has remained a mutual friend of ours ever since. So in case anybody wonders, Kerr Whitaker holds the record on this podcast, Gavin, because he's been on it 3 times.
Ooh, okay. It's impressive.
So it's impressive, but that's the respect I have from Kerr, for Kerr. So so he brought the two of us together, but it's an absolute delight. I will also publicly acknowledge the fact that you're living in Melbourne, and it's my favourite city because I was there for a few years. So how is Melbourne?
It is maybe much the same as when you were here. It's a great place to be. Right now we're in the middle of winter, so perhaps a little glum, but we've got the AFL football to keep us entertained. We've got the World Cup here at the moment, so that's exciting, and we get to peek over to the UK to watch the Ashes cricket. So it was very typical for Melbourne. That was a very sport-oriented response.
Yeah.
So
you left out the piece where the Matildas beat the Irish ladies soccer team a few days ago, and this week they're playing in Perth against the Canadians, who have an exceptionally strong team. So we won't go there, but yes, the AFL. I lived quite close to the Carlton ground for a period of time, and footy day was always a bit of a buzz around the place, very similar to our own Gaelic football kind of an atmosphere. But Gavin, look, genuinely really, really nice to talk to you. I mentioned in the intro there that you have a reputation, and you do have a reputation within the developer world. I've seen you talk several times. I've seen you talk at Unite. I've seen you talk in London, and you've grown. I suppose what I'd like to get to is you've grown that knowledge now through the agency world and now through the product world. But where did it start? Where did you actually find Shopify? Because you found it in the early days before people were mixing it up with Spotify, I'd say.
Yeah, OG, I guess. My background is software development. That's one of the things that I studied at uni. And sort of out of that, I was working in a couple of startups, moved over to the States to start a business with some friends of mine. And when that didn't work out very well, I needed to make money to eat. And so it just happened that when I started freelancing, one of my very first clients, who I still work with to this day actually, was a Shopify merchant, and they just needed a custom backend app built. So I kind of got involved in that route, and that was maybe 2013, 2012 or something like that. So very early in the Shopify world. It was very much like you could ask a question on the forums and Toby, the CEO, would jump in and answer questions on Liquid and fix bugs like live in real time when you were asking questions. So a little bit of a different beast to what it is today, but just really loved. I mean, the big thing that I say to anyone is the reason I've stuck around for so long is the ecosystem. It's consistently just been a very supportive group of people that I've met through the ecosystem, friends I've made. It is a really great and vibrant ecosystem. And while it's changed a lot over the years, I think that's still true. And I still think that is one of Shopify's biggest competitive advantages to any ecosystem. And I think that's valuable no matter if you're like targeting the sort of small, medium businesses that they start out with, or if you're trying to tackle enterprise as you are today, like that ecosystem is still essential because, no one builds stuff on their own.
Yeah, and we were talking about that before we pressed record as well. The ecosystem has been core to its success. And I think that's probably what a lot of other software companies don't get. I think they think that maybe that if you set up a partner program, well, then that builds the ecosystem. But in actual fact, Shopify have done it very, very uniquely. I always had the impression, Gavin, that you were always into the complex, the difficult, trying to find a solution for a problem that Shopify didn't already have. And I know that that's exactly what you're doing now. But at any stage, did you just build stores and just do the ordinary in order to understand the platform, or did you just go as a developer and just go straight into the code? I'm personally interested in how you started.
Yeah, it was, starting out early doors, the very first project, like I mentioned, was some custom app stuff. So I guess that was kind of focused on back end, and it was kind of like custom order management system. So actually probably relatively complex, but that kind of meant I got to know Shopify Themes and Liquid, and I'd done a fair bit of front end development anyway. So pretty shortly after I transitioned to like full-time freelancing in the Shopify space, I was doing anything. So store setup, custom themes, product migrations, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I sort of touched every part of the platform as it was at that stage. And there used to be a time where I felt like I had the whole thing in my head. These days, it's almost impossible to be doing that. So I think there are lots of corners of Shopify that I'm like, I sort of vaguely know what that is, but I don't have the same depth of knowledge across the whole platform that I may have, 5 years ago. But it was very much anything like setting up a tea towel store for someone who had it as a side hustle, like that kind of stuff. Over time, I think because my interest was in software development and the back end side of things, that just naturally drove me to focus on larger merchants, because they're typically the ones that see the ROI from that kind of build. They have the need for it, and they can't just be satisfied with something that's off the shelf. So I think, like, as a natural consequence of what I was interested in, it kind of moved up the chain to larger and I guess what these days I'd call larger mid-market and enterprise merchants. But that was also helped a lot, I think, by the fact of being here in APAC and there being quite a strong Shopify community in APAC here early doors, and building some relationships with some folks at Shopify who were working with larger merchants and were able to say, hey, you should work with these folks because we've seen what you've done and we like it. So definitely some good opportunities early on to work with larger merchants, which kind of accelerated that development, I guess. Yeah,
your location is interesting because, Australia has a population, I suppose, of around 20 million.
25 these days.
25. Oh, it's gone up significantly since I was there. So You've a great population, but also from my memory of Australia, Australians in general are early adopters of technology, aren't they? So would it be right to say that the demographic would be similar to Canada? In other words, Shopify was born out of Canada, but there is definitely similarities there. Would that be right, Gavin?
Definitely, like in terms of size of market and size of country, and some of the logistical challenges that get implied with that. So Australia's kind of interesting in like a technology and e-commerce perspective, because it does tend to be waves. So, for example, we were one of the first countries to have very widespread usage of tap and go in I don't know what they call it in Ireland, to be honest, but
contactless.
Contactless payment. There we go.
Yeah.
It's so ubiquitous now. Very, very early adopters in that front. But then we also have so many retailers here who are on these legacy ERP systems from 30 years ago. So yeah, it definitely goes in waves, and that's both interesting and frustrating and challenging at different times. But overall, I'd say Australians are pretty technology forward. Our banking system is generally pretty good. The payments landscape is mixed and varied and interesting. What I touched on most recently, big difference to us in the US and maybe the sort of the UK Ireland is due to the sparse population and the size of the country. Logistics and fulfillment is an absolute nightmare. And so dealing with shipping and logistics challenges is one of the things that a lot of the retailers here face. But if you focus on the East Coast, where 80% of the people live, then
you're okay.
You solve a few of those issues. But the rest of the country maybe a little more of a struggle.
So before we get to Submarine, then, so Disco Labs was the agency that you were running, which was I suppose you went from freelancer then, and you learned the Shopify platform. So how long were you running Disco Labs for?
It is still operational. It's maybe more in name only these days, but probably about 8 years from inception. So I was freelancing, just organically got more work than I could handle. And the thing that everyone does when that happens is like, I guess I start an agency now. And so that builds up very, very organically over 8 years. And we always stayed quite small and focused and boutique, I guess. Like we were always very much focused on building custom apps and integrations for merchants. We never sort of strayed outside into full service agency territory. So no front end design, no development, no marketing, not really product management or photography or anything like that. It was just very, very focused on complex back end logic and builds. And I think that was actually a really good decision because we were so niche and focused, we got really, really good at doing that kind of stuff, which has led into the actual product opportunities that we've got now. But also it meant that we were a very appealing partner agency for other businesses or other agencies that didn't have that depth of knowledge. They needed someone on a project to win a deal or to get a customer migrated, but we weren't threatening in the sense that they could bring us on a project. We could focus on this specific thing and deliver that. And as a result, we had really strong, or still have, I would say, really strong partnerships with a lot of agencies globally. And it's one of the ways we've been able to work with sort of the biggest brands on Shopify, whether it's Stamps or Hasbro or JB Hi-Fi. We wouldn't have been able to do that just as the agency solo. It's again, I guess it's coming back to that ecosystem thing is really important.
Yeah, and I suppose for our listeners that maybe aren't aware of the kind of the Shopify agency model, as a Shopify agency, within the ecosystem, you can lean on other agencies. So if you're not a design agency, you can lean on a design agency, or you can lean on the likes of Submarine to build complicated back-end integrations, and nobody threatens anybody. I'm sure it happens now and then, Gavin, but in general, it always would maybe happen in business, but in general, the beauty about the Shopify ecosystem is that as a business owner, whether you're an app developer or an agency, you can use other agencies within the ecosystem to help you deliver solutions for clients. And Gavin, that's exactly what you do. So what, if you were to summarize, like we'll get into more detail when it comes to I especially want to talk about pre-sales, by the way, because everybody's talking about subscriptions and everybody knows what that is. And I'd like to talk about the crowdfunding and also pre-sales. But just before we jump in there, what exactly is GetSubmarine.com?
Yeah, so I guess to take one step back, and when we were in that agency world and building these complex back-end apps for merchants and partnering with agencies, one of the things that cropped up quite repeatedly for larger merchants, and when I say larger, I mean everyone's definition changes, but let's say anywhere from 15 to 20 million a year in revenue and up, and the largest clients we've ever worked with at like $1 billion online revenue turnover. That's definitely enterprise end of the scale. But working with a lot of these merchants, a lot of the problems we were coming in to solve were around payment experiences is kind of the wanky catch-all term I'll use for it. But anything where there was more than a one-time financial transaction with a customer. And so the most obvious one of those is subscription, which everyone's very familiar with, but also things like pre-sales, where you might be taking an order but charging for it later or charging for it incrementally later. Crowdfunding, where obviously you're taking pledges and then charging people later. But then also things like installments, like not necessarily within an Affirm or a Shopify pay installments kind of model, but like genuine or merchant-driven installments, tokenizing cards so you can pass it off to other sorts of systems, all that kind of stuff. And because we had a bit of experience building some of that with some early customers in Australia, probably most notably Foods, who was at one point the largest Shopify merchant in Australia, 9-figure revenue, and a meal delivery service who had really complex subscription requirements, and would sort of build something out for them. We kept getting these questions about how we could adapt that to do other interesting things with payments in the Shopify space, which Shopify itself didn't necessarily support everything that merchants wanted to do, still doesn't. And so we saw that there was kind of an opportunity to start building our own internal tool set to make delivering these kinds of projects easier. And that was kind of the first iteration of Submarine, was what I would describe an internal platform for us to really easily build these complex payment flows. And when I say complex, there's like a couple of dimensions to that. There could be things around the business model. So let's say take Foods as an example, who was a meal delivery subscription service. One of the reasons they hadn't been able to use anything off the shelf to date was because they needed to talk to their delivery and logistics system. They needed to talk to their delivery zone management system, which knew what delivery days were available in different regions and all this sort of stuff. So all of this kind of information that needed to feed into their subscription system, and just off the shelf stuff just didn't do that or make it easy. So it was really, hey, we have to go and build a custom app to make this work.
Gavin, just hold on 1 second while we listen to our sponsors. Rewind.io is the leading data backup solution for your Shopify store. Did you know that there is no way of recovering lost data in Shopify? If your store is gaining traction, you may have multiple staff or third-party developers entering your store. Mistakes can happen and data can be easily deleted. Rewind.io puts you in control of your data, allowing you to restore anything accidentally lost from a single image to an entire store. It acts as a pretty cheap insurance policy for your Shopify account. At Milk Bottle, we help clients reduce their business risk by installing Rewind in every single store before we make any changes. Get your first month for free by simply replying to your sign-up email. So Gavin, you've mentioned complex purchases, but you're also in an area of, there's a time length for the authorization on a card. There's a lot of legislation around transferring data, massive security element within the banking sector. Did the direction of travel in the payments area for you, did that add further complexities, and did your team have to become payments experts, or how did you manage that side of your solution?
Yeah, we sort of didn't set out wanting to be payment experts or payment processors, I guess. And to this day, I still say that we aren't necessarily aiming to be a payment solution. Like, we don't want to be a competitor with Stripe. We don't want to be a competitor with Shopify Payments. The work we've done in the payments and the actual capturing of information and that sort of stuff, we've done that. And we've done that with integrations to a lot of different payment processors. But the reason we've done that is purely because existing solutions didn't support the sorts of flows that merchants wanted to do. And so what Submarine has evolved into is, and we've taken what we did internally as an agency and turned that into a product that other agencies can use to build these experiences, or merchants with in-house development teams can use to build these experiences. So we're trying to unlock the power that we had internally and make that more broadly accessible and scalable for people. So the value that I see in Submarine is having all of the kind of building blocks around these experiences. So whether it is like the concept of a subscription or a subscription order, or the concept of a pre-sale campaign and a pre-sale order, and all of the sort of like boilerplate orchestration that you do around that. So whether it's moving a pre-sale campaign through its launched and ended and collecting payment and fulfillment stages, all of that sort of stuff lives in our platform, but it all lives in our platform in a very accessible and flexible way, so that you as a developer can pick and choose which bits you want, pick and choose how you want those bits to talk to each other. And when it comes to customizing it and saying, well, this specific merchant has a particular requirement around when they're capturing payment, you're able to implement that using our system in a way that isn't, I need to go out and build a custom app, and isn't, I need to do a bunch of hackery. It's, I've got a really simple and straightforward way to implement that on the platform. And I think that is a super powerful concept, and it's, why we built it and why I think it's resonating with the merchants and the agencies that we're working with today. Because that idea of flexibility just doesn't exist across enough of the ecosystem at the moment. And I think for too long, like merchants have even large merchants have been forced to sort of cram or shoehorn their business model into what particular tech vendors offer. And I really think it should be the other way around, that a merchant comes to you saying, this is how I want my business model to work. Your technology needs to fit around that and adapt and support that. So that's kind of like at a high level, that's the big idea behind Submarine, is to be able to be the platform that lets people do that kind of thing.
So you mentioned subscriptions, and then you spoke about pre-sales. So can you give us an example of what you've done in that environment?
Yeah. So with pre-sales, I guess I kind of see there being kind of two types of business models that the merchants we're working with will use. One is kind of the launch type of pre-sale, where a merchant is releasing a new product. They want to build as much hype ahead of a launch, collect as many orders, perhaps have a limited amount, and then release them and in one big hit. Yeah, like I say, a lot of big hype, generating some word of mouth, and then also just being able to see what the demand for the product is and being able to order the appropriate quantity when they go out and get it shipped. And so like a really good example of a merchant that we've done that with for a very long time, actually, so nearly 5 years now, is Hasbro, the toy company. So every time there's like a new Star Wars toy, collectible, I should say, that gets released, or G.I. Joe or Transformers, that's released as a pre-sale on the Hasbro website. And it's Submarine behind the scenes that is orchestrating that and keeping track of quantity limits. And then when the pre-sale is ready to actually drop, which could be, 3 months, 4 months down the track, we're collecting payment and getting it ready to fulfill. So that's a really effective business model for merchants who are releasing these new products. We see a lot of people who are doing like collabs, so like sneaker brands, fashion brands, board game companies, where they want that kind of like, hey, get your order in, get it locked away. You don't have to pay until it's ready to ship out, but something where you have a lot of hype around it. And then the second model that we're seeing more and more people use, and it's something that's interesting that I don't think many merchants are doing, but using pre-sales as kind of like a back order system as an alternative to a back in stock waitlist. So I'm sure a lot of merchants that you'd work with or that other people have worked with in general would have I run out of stock, I put an email box on the product page saying, put your email in and we'll let you know when it's back. Of course, that's actually quite a poor customer experience, and it relies on the customer then getting the email, seeing it, still being motivated enough to go and purchase the product. So what we're testing is with a few merchants, and what we've seen some success with is, instead of that, just actually collect the order from the customer at the point in time where they have the highest intent to purchase, i.e. when they're landing on the product page for the first time. Take the order, don't charge them, so they're not going to be like, well, I'm paying for something that I'm not going to get for 2 months. But yeah, just take the order. Then 2 days before it comes back in stock, you can let them know, hey, we've got this back in stock. We'll charge your card in 2 days unless you cancel your order. You've got their card tokenized, so you can just take the payment and ship it out. So yeah.
So Gavin, that's a big improvement in conversions. It's a completely different experience.
It's huge. So what we've seen, industry average with the merchants who we've worked with, back in stock waitlists convert anywhere between 8 to 15%, and it varies a little bit depending on vertical and that sort of thing. But once you have a customer that's placed a pre-order, they convert it to about 80%. So once you actually get the order in, only 20% of customers cancel it before you actually collect the payment. So it's a huge difference. It's a huge uplift. Yeah. And at the end, and not only are you capturing that order at the time of intent, you give the customer the option of purchasing other things in their cart. You've actually collected that customer's details, so their shipping address, and a lot more than just an email address. So you have a lot more information about them. There are innumerable benefits to doing it that way. So I think we'll see a lot more merchants actually using that going down the line. And I guess I'm excited that that's kind of one of the first products in the Submarine platform that we productize and have rolled out and are making available to merchants.
So you're authorizing the card, and then giving the customer the option as to whether they want to charge the card or not.
Yeah, so it's actually not an authorization, so you're not holding the funds on the card, and it works in a Shopify context. It works with Shopify payment credit cards, but also PayPal Express. So it's actually just tokenizing it, so you're not holding the funds, you can then charge them, months later if you need to.
Yeah.
Common sense and probably customer experience dictates that before you actually go ahead and charge them, you just give them a reminder to make sure that they're still keen for the product. But it's not a, hey, you need to action this. It's like a, hey, by the way, if you do nothing, we're going to, send you this thing that you asked for. And of course, like in terms of how that flow works, it's up to the merchant and how they want to do that, and what the timing on that looks like. But and then we've found it really effective.
And then Gavin, just before we jump off that's great stuff. We'll put links in the show notes to information on that. To ask a kind of an obvious question, then you can integrate into Klaviyo then, and can Klaviyo drive that customer experience?
That is actually like basically what we aim for, because at the end of the day, merchants have lots of different apps, and so many of them sort of take over the responsibility of emailing or communicating with customers, and that just doesn't it's a very fragmented approach, and it really destroys the brand experience. So our perspective, and every merchant we've ever worked with has always wanted one central place to manage their customer comms. And so a lot of the time that is Klaviyo. So our principle has always been, look, we have some out of the box email templates, but really we expect you to use those for testing and making sure that everything's working. And realistically, you're going to be plugging our system into your primary provider. So for example, Klaviyo, we're a tech partner with Klaviyo. You can integrate directly with them. And so when you have that upcoming campaign order about to close notification, that's an event in our system, pushes into Klaviyo. Klaviyo then not only knows that customer has got that pre-order placed, and therefore they know that about that customer, but they can also drive that the comms to them, whether that's email or SMS, or if the customer's elected a preference that's stored in Klaviyo, it'll flow through there. So again, I think that's just another iteration of the flexible commerce piece, right? Is being able to plug into the existing systems that merchants have.
Yeah, no, you've described it very well. It enables merchants to set up a whole different set, customer base and a flow base based on that, whether they cancelled or whether they took the order. So that's fantastic. What you've just described, Gavin, is flexible commerce. Is that right?
Yeah, well, like an element of it, I think. I think you mentioned up top we were going to dive into the world of headless and composable and all of the buzzwords that are thrashing around the ecosystem at the moment. I think headless specifically, composable commerce also to an extent, they're all about the idea of, being able to pick best-in-class tools and maybe best-in-class for your specific business at that specific time, and being able to stitch them together and making them play nicely together. And I think that is really valuable and important. I think both headless and composable are very tech-focused terms. Like they're really focused on, are you API first? How much of that API is open? What does your infrastructure look like? Like it's very focused on the actual core tech. And so I think that's a very important part. Like at the end of the day, if you don't have the tech in e-commerce that supports that kind of composability and switching things in and out, you end up with a very rigid structure. But I think flexible commerce is more than just that tech part. Like, yes, that tech part and the composability is really important, but it's also like how quickly that stack and your business can respond to change. So, can you deploy your current e-commerce experience into a new region in a matter of weeks rather than a matter of months? Like not only from a technical perspective, but also from a business and logistics perspective and like a risk appetite perspective. Things like being, global first. So understanding that, especially for merchants outside the US, the e-commerce market is huge and it is global. And increasingly, if you're not able to sell cross-border, you're going to be very hampered as a merchant. So being able to do that is another part of the flexibility. And then, I think openness is another really important part. So making sure that anything your tools or platforms you're working with can do, you have access to that. And so not walling off different parts of your products to different partners or different types of merchants and things like that. So I guess they're kind of some of the high level ideas that I have behind what flexible commerce is.
Well, Gavin, you mentioned also composable commerce, which is a buzzword that's around Shopify. What is composable commerce?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of like, I think headless is, so the headless commerce is one facet of it, which is, I guess, focused on, hey, you should be able to have a front end to your website that you can stitch on to any sort of back end or any sort of collection of back ends. I think composable commerce is just sort of taking that idea and extending it to the entire tech stack. So the idea that you should be able to pick the best email marketing tool, which is, of course, is Klaviyo, because they're sponsors of the podcast.
They were.
Yeah, they were. Okay.
Yeah,
well, maybe I should mention some competitors then.
Good.
No, but yeah, you should be able to pick, the best email marketing software for you, the best order management system, the best subscription system, and have a way to have them talk to each other in a way that means that you can swap those components out.
Yeah.
And I mean, the idea behind that is, as you grow, you can chop and change those components out. And I guess there's also another benefit in my head, at least for merchants, which is that if those components are genuinely composable and swappable, then the competition amongst different providers is more intense, and the overall cost of ownership drops for a merchant. So I think that's an important consideration as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the composable landscape. I think one thing that's kind of been lost with the discussion around composable and Shopify specifically is that a lot of people have for a long time sort of tried to paint Shopify as the antithesis to composable, and that it's a monolith and it's one big stack. And like, yes, you can get a lot of stuff out of Shopify itself, but I think what a lot of people miss is that no matter what approach you're using, you need to have some sort of glue in the middle to stitch everything together. And so whether that's like if you're using commerce tools, then that glue is commerce tools. If you're using BigCommerce, then that glue is BigCommerce. And so it doesn't matter how much you say the words headless or composable, you need some common language, common framework to bring all those bits together. And actually, I think Shopify is just that. It's had an API forever. For a very long time, it's been very rare for any single merchant to have just Shopify and not pull in these first-party or third-party components and tools. And so I actually think Shopify fits quite well into the composable narrative, and it doesn't always get the credit that it should for that. But and I think it's actually a really good example of composability in terms of being able to swap in those third-party apps in a relatively easy manner.
I mean,
and that's all. Sorry, Keith.
Oh, you're okay. So, Gavin, there could be even an argument to say that they defined it, because since day one, you could add an app, which on a very, very low, simple level is exactly what you just described. Obviously, headless is for the kind of top few percent, but I think part of the reason Shopify doesn't get the credit for that is possibly because by some, it's still seen as the kind of mom and pop platform, which is obviously completely not the case since, it's changed dramatically in the last 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I think they've been slow to sort of adopt and drive and own the conversation around composable. So I think a lot of, you look at what they're doing with commerce components in the kind of enterprise space, like I think that's a direct response to the Mac Alliance and Commerce Tools pushing this new composability narrative. And so they're playing catch up a little bit. But I think in terms of like actually walking the walk and having a platform that has quite a high degree of composability, like you say, I think they've done that for quite a long time, and it's just because they haven't had a particular sticker slapped on the box that people have not always thought of them as a composable platform. There's certainly there are things about it which are more challenging, and some things you can do in a commerce tools that are easier than in a Shopify world. But I think I'd agree with you when you say they've been doing it for a long time. I mean, maybe going back one further, you look at like WordPress and its plugin system.
Yes,
that's pretty composable.
Yeah, it is.
It was just a bit of a challenging
experience.
Challenging experience, and also just like the architecture of that. Composability when you're running the platform is really difficult. And I think with what Shopify is doing with things like Shopify Functions now, that's kind of like the next evolution of WordPress plugins, where it's like that custom code that's running in the platform that, but done in a way where it's sandboxed and performant, which was always kind of one of the biggest challenges of WordPress stuff, was that, once you had a plugin that had access to everything, which meant it could break everything. So
that's the problem.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Gavin, I could talk to you about flexible and headless and pre-sales for another hour, but we've come to the end. thank you so much for your time.
No worries. Time flies. I looked up the clock. So, okay, we're done.
We'll put links to everything that you've done in the past in the show notes. And thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Thanks for listening. All of our episodes are available on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Podcasts. A special note of appreciation goes to our sponsors, Rewind.io, the leading backup solution for Shopify store owners. Get your first month of Rewind for free by simply responding to any welcome email once you sign up for your free trial on Rewind.io. If you're a Shopify user with an exciting story to tell, reach out to the team on podcast@milkbottlelabs.com. Until the next time, take care.